Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Fireside Chat. I think this is the 9th, and they've all been great successes. And this one, I'm sure, is going to be another great success. Tonight, we have one of the most adventurous women I've ever met, Renate Belczyk, who's come from Castlegar to join us. So please join me in welcoming Renate.
So I start now?
Sure, you can start. Where would you like to start with childhood, growing up in Berlin?
Yeah, I was born in Dresden, but very soon afterwards we moved to Berlin, to the outskirts of Berlin, and there was a forest behind the house, and the river Spree, with a little beach where we learned how to swim and where we spent most of our summers. It was a beautiful spot. It was an apartment house, but a small one. There were 6 families there, and we all knew each other. And in the apartment below us lived Sigrid, who became my lifelong friend. Actually, I'm going to see her in Mexico next week. Next month. But that's beside the point. Sigrid and I just became friends, and we did everything together. But while we were still children, and we played, and then just after we started school, the war started, and living in Berlin, actually in the outskirts of Berlin, I loved to be outside and watch all the bombers coming and dropping their stuff. I just thought this was just so exciting. My parents didn't quite think the same thing, but anyway, the war just went on. And one Christmas, there was an alarm in the middle of the night, and we all went into the cellar, and some bombs flew around very close by. And when we finally got up into apartment again, every window was broken, and even some doors had flown throughout the apartment. And my mother had made a Christmas cake. And in those days, it was not that easy to make a cake. You had to save a long time to get all the stuff that goes into a cake. Anyway, the cake was just full of glass. And I said, Mom, let's just take the glass out and still eat it. And Mom said, no way, and took the cake and threw it in the garbage can. It just broke my heart. Anyway, shortly thereafter, all the elementary schools in Berlin were closed. And Sigrid moved to her grandparents in Bavaria, and we were taken east, about 100 kilometers east of Berlin. We got a one-room place and an outdoor toilet, and instead of running water inside, there was a pump outside, and we had to pump the water. But I thought it was all quite interesting and it was different. Anyway, and we had to go to school by bus. Things went well for about a year, and then the Russians approached, and we heard the shooting, it was just impossible to stay where we were. And my father organized a bus, and that took us and some other families west, away from the Russians, because we heard horrible stories of what the Russians did to the people. And so we only traveled by night, because during the day there were the low-flying bombers that tried to hit cars and people. So we made it. And we ended up in a small village in Swabia in southern Germany. We again had one room for my mother and my sister and I, and my father joined us a few months later. He managed to find us. And then the war came to an end, and the Americans occupied the village where we were. And the first time I dared to go outside, 2 Americans were walking in front of me. And suddenly one turned around and put his hand in his pocket. And I was 100% sure that he was going to shoot me. And he handed me a chocolate bar. I have loved Americans ever since. Well, we couldn't go to high school in the small village where we lived, so we had to, every Monday morning at 5 o'clock, we got up and rode our bicycles 30 kilometers to the next town where we went to high school, my sister and I. And we rented there a small room and went for food. We went to a soup kitchen, and we were always hungry. Luckily, we got home on Saturdays, and mother, who worked for the farmers a bit, she always had some extra food, and we ate and ate and ate on the weekends. But you know, things got better. In 1948, all the German money got worthless, and every citizen got 20 marks. And so my sister and I, we also had 20 marks. And we went into the next store. And before, the stores had been empty. And overnight, they were full with good stuff. And there were even chocolate bars. And we saw one, and it was 3 marks and 50 cents, and we discussed it for a long time, and then we said, let's do it, and we bought it, and we just loved it. Yes, and then the school holidays came around, and my sister and I, we bicycled to south to meet Sigrid, and Sigrid and my sister and I, we spent 4 weeks traveling around southern Germany, seeing all the castles and the cathedrals and whatever there was worth seeing. And we even climbed the Zugspitze, which is the highest mountain in Germany. We had never climbed a mountain before, and we just had our regular shoes, and we had to cope with it once we got into the snow. It was quite an exciting trip, but you know, it was our first mountain, and we liked it. And then, well, the holidays came to almost came to an end, and then my parents moved to Frankfurt. And in the same month, Sigrid's parents also moved to Frankfurt. And so we planned our next trip together. We wanted to see Italy. We had never been in a foreign country, and it just sounded so wonderful. So we jumped on our one-speed bikes, and traveled through Switzerland and up on the Alps. There were hardly any cars on the roads, because in those days people didn't have cars. But once in a while, a truck came, and the trucks never went faster than 20 kilometers an hour. So whenever we heard a truck, we jumped on the bikes, and then when the truck came, we held onto it and went up the mountains. And we did this throughout the trip. And once 2 policemen came and told us to to come. But they weren't mad at us at all. They just wanted to know where we came from and what we were doing. And at the end, they even stopped the truck for us so that we could hang on. It was a wonderful trip. We first came to Milena and watched all the cathedrals and the museums, and then Rome, and then we went even further south. We just biked and down on the west coast and back up on the east coast, and ended up through Austria and back home again. The whole trip took about 6 weeks, just, the holidays. And it was absolutely wonderful. And then we decided we don't know enough languages. We just had French and English in school, but you know how much you know when you with your school languages. Anyway, we went for a year to London as nannies. And I mean, all the nanny work I didn't find very exciting. They made us really, really work hard. But I managed in between. I took 2 weeks off and went to Scotland and Ireland and had a wonderful time. Actually, I took my first plane ever from London to Edinburgh, and then I was out of money and I hitchhiked the rest and all the way back again. So after we came home from England, we said now we have to learn French, but we didn't want to be nannies again or something like that. We just wanted to be more free. So we worked for a while and earned enough money to buy 3 speed bikes. Oh, it must the most wonderful bike I have ever done. We were so proud of our 3 speed bikes, and then we spent almost a year traveling through France, biking through France and talking to people, and when we ran out of money, we got ourselves a job. We worked in a hotel in Paris, and we worked in the wine harvest in southern France, and then when we were finished with France, we went on to Spain, and we saw our first orange tree. A real orange tree. We thought this was so exciting. So we climbed over the fence and picked up some oranges that were lying on the ground. And just then, 2 policemen, also on bicycles, came, and they climbed over the fence, took those oranges away from us, threw them away, climbed up on the tree, and picked really nice ones and handed them to us. And then they invited us, they said, let's go to the next village and we have ice cream together. So that's what we did. And just then we got a letter from Sigrid's mother. She said she wasn't feeling well and she wanted us to come home. And inside the letter were 2 railroad tickets for us to get back to Frankfurt. So it was just then Christmas, and we went back to Frankfurt and got jobs and worked really, really hard. And Sigrid said, I have relatives in Mexico. Why don't we go to Mexico? Well, Mexico just seemed so way out of, anyway, but we got in touch with them, and they said, why don't you come? So we got ourselves a freighter in Amsterdam and took the freighter to Mexico. And the relatives, they were really quite nice. And we stayed with them for a little while, and they really spoiled us. And we helped them. They had 2 little kids, and we helped them with the kids. And then we got our own place. And
You were in Mexico City?
pardon?
You were in Mexico City?
In Mexico City, yes. And we got our own place. And everybody in our little street knew the muchachas alemanas and said hi to us whenever we passed by the baker and the butcher and whoever. And we wanted to learn Spanish as fast as we could, so we joined a club. And the first club that came around was a mountaineering club. And the guys, they were delighted when we joined and took us up Popocatépetl, which is about 5,500 meters. And well, it wasn't easy, but we made it. And the next weekend, we went to Ixtaccíhuatl. They call it the Ixta. And that's quite a high mountain too, and we had a wonderful time. And so every weekend we went rock climbing and mountain climbing and doing this and that. And we had to work because we didn't have much money lying around. So I got a job at the Colegio Alemán, which was a German school, which was supposed to be the best school in Mexico City. And I got the kindergarten class and had to teach them German. And Sigrid got a job in a bookstore. So we worked and mountain climbed and rock climbed, and on other weekends we did this or that. We saw lots of places. And after 6 months, our visas ran out. So we decided we better go to Guatemala and get another visa. And our idea was to go to the Atlantic coast and try to find a boat that took us to Guatemala instead of just taking a plane and going like most people would do. Anyway, we traveled through the Yucatan, and it was all jungle there, and we saw those wonderful monuments like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, and the pyramids and the monuments and the statues, and we were just, it was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And then we came to the coast and tried to find a ship, but there was no ship anywhere that was going to Guatemala. So, but there was Isla Mujeres, a little island just off the coast, and we took a boat and went across, and somebody rented us a hut with just 2 hammocks in it. That was all, 2 hammocks. And so we spent a week there just enjoying ourselves. The water was so clean and so clear, and there were turtles and fish and all sorts of things in the water, and we swam with all of them. But then we had to go back and finally take a plane to Guatemala, get our visa, and return to our jobs in Mexico City. And yeah, and we were there for a year, and several of the men asked us to marry them, and so we sort of discussed, shall we stay in Mexico forever and ever, or shall we keep going? And we decided to keep going. And we thought Canada was a good place, and we got visas for Canada, and then we flew off to Canada. And when we arrived in Canada, some hay had been cut near the airport, and it smelled so nice. Actually, the smells in Canada were so different from the smells in Mexico that we loved Mexico, loved Canada right away. And we had a friend in Boston, and we had arranged this a long time ago that we would go on a canoe trip in northern Quebec, and he took us, he came with a canoe, and we drove somewhere in northern Quebec, and then got the canoe in the water and started paddling. And one day a moose was paddling with us, and we saw so many animals, and we ate huckleberries, and we had just a wonderful time. But we had to do a lot of portages from one river to the lake and to the next river, and so on and so forth. And finally, we ran out of food, and we ate huckleberries for a day or two. And there was still some flour, and I mixed the flour with water, and I baked it over the open fire. And my Sigrid and Cove, our friend, said they had never tasted a better bread. They must really have been hungry. And then we happened to come to a logging camp, and we asked if we could buy some food. And they said, "Oh, you sure can, but first you sit down and eat." And they put the biggest meal in front of us. It was absolutely amazing. And then they filled us a huge bag with food, and we wanted to pay, and they absolutely refused to take a penny for it. So we had enough food for the rest of the trip. And then one day we landed back where the car was. And Sigrid and I, we just looked at each other and said, if it had been up to us, we would still be in Quebec, in northern Quebec. We would never have found our way back, but we had a guide to lead us. And so we, in Mexico, just before we left, 4 of our mountaineering friends had climbed Mount Victoria and got killed. They slipped and fell and got killed. And they gave us a medal and said, would you go and put this medal in memory of those 4 friends on top of Mount Victoria? So we said, sure. And so we started hitchhiking west, and we asked the first driver, do you know where Mount Victoria is? Of course he didn't, and nobody did. I mean, we had so many drivers. Oh yes, and they all invited us either for a hamburger or a piece of pie, yes. And for a while we wondered if this was the only food they had in Canada. Anyway, when we reached Calgary, we hitchhiked. The guy that picked us up, he knew Mount Victoria, and he actually took us to Lake Louise and showed Mount Victoria to us, and we were quite impressed. And then he said, but it was already late September by then, and he said you should go to Lake O'Hara and try to climb it from there, it's easier. So we went to Lake O'Hara, and there was the guy there was all grassy. He was Lawrence Grassy, yeah, and he lent us ice axes and told us which way to go. Well, off we went, but we didn't. I don't know. We just went up this mountain, and it got steeper and got steeper and got steeper and got really steep, and then it got dark, and finally we said, that's it. So we just sat down and spent the night on this steep mountainside. And the next morning, as soon as it got light, we climbed down again. And Gracie laughed his head off when we told him. But we said, we'll try again. And he gave us, I think, even better instructions this time. He must have. Because this time we made it. It was difficult in places, and we were a little bit worried, but we made it to the top and left the medal there and thought of our friends and went back. And when we finally came down, Gracie was very happy to see us, and he was even happier that we had made it. And we stayed in one of the cabins there, and there was Hans Moser. And we talked together and shared the meal together, and Hans said, why don't you go on a climb with me tomorrow? So we did. We got to know each other even better, and we had such a good time. And then, well, then it was time for us to leave. We hitchhiked back to Montreal. We both got a job because we were out of money by then. And I worked for a Swiss firm as a translator, and Sigrid worked for a Bell Telephone. So the winter, Christmas came and Christmas went, and one day there was a knock at the door, and there was Hans. And Philip also. We saw you then. You came with Hans, and Hans asked us if we would cook for him in Little Yoho. In Little Yoho, he had a hut there, and people were coming, and he said, "Come in March." So March came along. We quit our jobs and hitchhiked west again. This time we knew where Mount Victoria was, and we came to Banff, and Hans took us up to Tucker Falls, and from there we walked to Little Yoho. And oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that in Montreal we started skiing in the Laurentians. We had never really skied before, but we learned a little bit about skiing. And Hans had skis for us, which we also took up to Little Yoho. And then one day I cooked, and Sigrid went with all the people skiing. And the next day Sigrid cooked, and I went with the people skiing. Oh yeah, and we had to bake our own bread. We had never really baked bread before. And it was a wood stove too. And I remember putting the bread together, and then we both kneeled in front of the oven and said, "Please, God, let the bread rise." And he did. Well, we had absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. And you met Leo there, who's in.
Oh yeah, we met Leo, of course. We met Leo. Yes, Leo kissed the girls. Somebody told us. Yes, yes. Philip and Leo. And it was. We all became friends, and yes, they were glorious, glorious.
Remember when I picked you up in field?
What?
When I picked you up in field to walk to Yoho, and you walked behind me, and I thought, well, those two girls, you know, they're just girls, so
Yes.
they'll go too fast. So then one of you said, "Leo, is that the fastest you can talk?" What? I said, "Okay," so I walked a little faster. After a while, one of them said again, "Is that the fastest you can walk?" I said, "Well, go to hell." I started walking at good full speed. They were with me all the way to the hut. I tell you, I was surprised.
Well, anyway, those were glorious weeks. So Sigrid and I, we always wanted to go to Alaska. So we decided to hitchhike to Alaska. But the roads were all dirt roads. There was nothing paved, not even in the cities. And every night, you know, well, we rode in cars, but all the dust came in everywhere. And every night we were dusty from head to toe. But and we stayed in rest houses that had been built beside the road at every so many kilometers, and it had a wood stove, and we just put out our sleeping bags and slept in there, and never ever was anybody else there, just the two of us. Well, we made it to the border eventually, and we showed them our passports, and they said we had the wrong visa. We had a transit visa, and they wouldn't let us in. And there we had traveled all this way to the Alaskan border, and they wouldn't let us in. So, well, what could we do but returned? And the first car that picked us up was a guy by the name of Morris, and he said he was going to California, and he can take us to California. And we said, well, anyway, we rode with Morris, and Morris joined us, shared our meals in the huts, and he lit the fires, and he even slept in the same hut. And eventually, we made it to Vancouver, and Morris asked me if I would marry him. But I wasn't quite ready to be Mrs. Morris, so I gave an excuse or another, and then Morris left. And and then we liked Vancouver right away, and we went to the harbor, and we looked at the ships, and there was a Japanese ship sitting there, and the officers invited us up on board for tea. So we sat with the officers and enjoyed the tea and cookies or whatever there was. And then one of them said, "Have you ever been to Japan?" And we said no. And he said, "Why?" And Sigrid and I, we looked at each other. And the first thing we went to a Japanese embassy. And they said, "No, you don't need visas." So then we went to all the shipping companies, and we finally found a ship, sort of a semi-freighter that would take us to Japan. And wow, but the ship didn't leave for 3 weeks. So we thought, we go to Banff again and visit Leo and Hans and Philip and whoever there is. And so we hitchhiked, and we came to Revelstoke. And the Big Bend Road, which is 180 kilometers, wasn't open yet because it was too early in the spring. So we could have taken the train, but we didn't want to waste our money on a train. So we said, we'll just walk the 180 kilometers. We bought some supplies and started walking, and spent the night with our tent, and we, as usual, we camped and carried our heavy packs too. And on the second day, a warden was driving the road. He was going to check if it was ready to be opened up, and offered us a ride. And in no time, we were golden. Yeah.
Wow. It's quite the story, Renate. I know the story. I know where it's going. I know what comes next.
Am I talking too much?
No. You're making this the easiest interview I've ever done. So tell us about going skiing at Rogers Pass. That's what comes next, I think.
We met Hans, and he was skiing in a glacier, and we skied with him for a little while, and then we even skied into Assiniboine and back, but that was quite a difficult trip because the snow wasn't that good anymore. But anyway, and then it was time to get back to Vancouver to meet our ship, and there we were on the ship, traveling to Japan. It was wonderful. We went along the Aleutian Islands, and then on and on and on. And oh yeah, in the first class were the rich people, and in the second class there were the missionaries, and in the third class were the Japanese and Sigrid Nye, and the first evening when the meal was served, they only gave us chopsticks, and we had never used those things before, and the others were already finished by the time we had barely started. But we learned fast. And the Japanese people were so friendly and so nice. They even, one of them gave us lessons every day in Japanese so that we would know how to talk a little bit. And oh yes, and on Sundays, the missionaries always invited us up to second class for Mass. And we always sang, "What a friend I have in Jesus." And then, eventually we landed in Yokohama, and actually one of the missionaries has said, I know a place in Tokyo. There are some missionaries, you can stay there, rent a place cheaply. So we did. And and there we were in Tokyo. It was an 8 million people lived there then. And it seemed quite crowded. And so the first thing we had to get were bicycles. So we went around and actually met some Americans, and they said at the PX or whatever that store is, we have really good bicycles, and they are a lot cheaper than the Japanese ones. So we went with them to the PX and bought each a 3-speed bike, and then we decided to go north to Hokkaido, to the northernmost island. The paved road stopped when we got out of Tokyo, and there were only dirt roads. And the dirt road was really narrow. If there ever a car came, there weren't very many. Just once in a while, we had to move really to the side so that the car could pass. But it was a good trip. There were so many nice people. If we had a flat tire almost every day, but that's beside the point. But whenever we came to a bicycle shop, they always checked our bikes, and they always cleaned them, and they always oiled them, and always refused pay. And people invited us in their homes, and invited us for meals, and we just loved it. And one day we met Father Heinrich. He was just walking on the road, and we stopped, and he saw us, and we told him that we came from Germany, and he started crying and said, "I haven't seen German girls for 20 years." And he just couldn't get over it, and he said, "You have to come with me." And he was the leader of some nuns, and that had, so we got a room, and we got food, and we got we got spoiled, and they wanted to keep us, but we wanted to go on. And Father Heinrich was still crying when we left, and waved, but he was a good guy. Yeah, and so we saw so many nice people. Once a car passed us on a mountain, on a quite a steep hill, and it waited for us on the very top and handed us each a Coca-Cola, which, I mean, how nice can you be? And
you were in the press all the time, in the news.
oh yes, we were. Oh, I forgot to tell you about it. We were interviewed every single day. There were 2 German girls on a bicycle, and all the newspapers were writing about us. I guess that's why people mostly knew about us when we came along, and we're so friendly and so kind. And yeah, and this went on and on and on, and we came to Hakodate. No, Aomori first. There we took a ship to Hakodate. That's on the island of Hokkaido, and then we bicycled around Hokkaido. Again, met millions of people, and yeah, and eventually made our way back to Tokyo. And we were approached by Fuji Industries. That was a firm that made motor scooters. And they said, if you go with us on TV and answer questions and so on and so forth, we'll give you motor scooters. Well, we went on TV. Sigrid had a guitar, and she even played a song for them while we were interviewed. And yes, we answered all their questions, and we got each a motor scooter. So we gave our bicycles to the missionaries and had one, but we didn't have a license. Neither Sigrid or I ever had driven anything with a motor, so we had no. So the people that worked for Fuji Industries, they hopped in the back of our scooters and drove us to or they even drove us to the place where you get driver's licenses, and they spent an hour looking for some papers with that were in Japanese, and well, it was extremely difficult. And finally, he said, "Okay, it's all right. Just let's make the practical, the driver's license," and we went on our motor scooters and rode through Tokyo, and then they handed us a license. I think they were just glad to get rid of us. And now we had motor scooters.
Yeah, and then you continued to drive around Japan on the motor scooters for a while.
Yes, now we did the southern parts there, yes.
Yeah.
The southern part of Honshu Island, and then Kyoto, and I forgot the third one, but whatever. And we eventually came to Hiroshima, and the bishop himself gave us a guided tour of the church, and told us, well, all about it. And then we came to Mount Fuji, and so we just left the motor scooters near a farmhouse and hiked up Mount Fujiyama, and that was very nice. Had a lovely view from the top, and
I think it was quite a hard day, as I remember.
Yes, it was a hard day.
Yeah, 14 hours, as I remember.
Something like that, yeah. But yes, and we were a bit spoiled because we were on motor scooters, yeah. Oh yeah, and we got free gas too. Whenever we came to a gas station, people were already awaiting us because they had, from the newspapers, were writing about still writing about us, and one had a big sign up, welcome Sigrid and Renate. And they took us out for dinners, and they took us out to show us a wedding, and they took us out to show us a sword fight. And I mean, we were spoiled, absolutely rotten.
Wow. Wow.
And we loved Japan. We
Yeah.
really, really did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And saw so many beautiful things like Kyoto and Kobe and all the places. Well, and finally we came back to Tokyo, and we wanted to return the scooters. And they said, no way, they are your scooters, you take them. So, So we went again to all kinds of different shipping companies, and finally found one that would take us and our scooters too. I think they only wanted $150 each. So, yeah.
And
so,
where was it going to?
Pardon?
And where was the boat
Oh, it
going?
was going to Calcutta. Oh. Sometimes I take things for granted. Yeah. To India. Yeah, and we stopped in Hong Kong, and we stopped in we stopped in so many
Rangoon?
places going there.
You stopped in Burma, I think, and Rangoon.
We've been in Penang, in Singapore, in Rangoon, and finally arrived in Calcutta. And at first, Calcutta depressed us a bit. There were just so many poor people, and we stayed in the YWCA, and it was hot and hot and hot, and so we thought, well, we'll go north. We go to Nepal first. So we drove north again on dirt roads, and then we came to the river Ganges, and we stood there, and after a while a boat came and took us across, and then we came to another river which had a broken bridge, and we sort of almost carried the scooters and us across one after another, but it was quite a difficult journey. And finally we came to the border between India and Nepal, and the border guys told us that's where the road ends. There was no road to Kathmandu then. And so we said, well, we'll just walk there. And we left our scooters. Can we leave the scooters with you? We said. They said, yeah, no problem, just leave them here. And we could go by train for another 60 or 70 miles. And then we started walking. And one day we came to a hill, or a mountain, I should say, and we saw Mount Everest, and that was exciting. And eventually we saw Kathmandu way below us, and Kathmandu then was a true wonderland. It had only one hotel, and it had one car which belonged to the king, and it was carried across a mountain for him. And this in this one hotel, the owner was a Russian by the name of Boris, and we asked him if he could put up our tent in his yard, and he said no problem. And so we put up the tent, and the next morning there was sort of a little knock at the tent, and there was a servant with a silver tray and tea and sugar and milk. It was just amazing. We killed ourselves laughing before we finally started having our breakfast. And then we met some Swiss some Swiss people, and one of them said that in Langtang, about 8 days north towards Tibet, there is a Swiss guy teaching the Nepalese to make cheese. And if you want to go with a fellow, then you can. So he said, just buy enough food. So we went out and bought 20 pounds of rice and 20 pounds of lentils. That's all we ate ever, rice and lentils. And the next morning we met this guy. We called him Knulle because his whole face was all, he was so dirty that whenever he sweated, little rivers ran down. It was really quite something. And
This was your Tibetan guide.
Yes, yes. When he took us to Langtang. Yeah, it was an 8-day trip, and every morning at 6 o'clock he only knew 2 words. It was yes and no, and he called yes, 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 and then we got up and got ready, and we walked for about 3 hours, and then at 10 o'clock we had our first meal of the day. And in Nepal they only had 2 meals, one at 10 and one in the evening, and so we sat there and cooked the rice and lentils, and yeah. And then we started walking again, and eventually we landed in Langtang. And we thought the Swiss guy that taught there, he would have a place where we could stay, but he was living in a hay barn, and he was sleeping in the hay. And when we came, he said, "Oh yeah, there's lots of room. You can." So we found ourselves a place in the hay also, and the next day, the first thing we did, we went up the river and washed from head to toe, and so on. And then in the evening, this fellow by the name, his name was Sepp. He said, "I'm going hunting tomorrow. Do you want to come?" Chic didn't want to go, and I said, "Oh yes, I'd love to go." And so we went up towards almost to the border of Tibet, and we didn't see anything, and we were just going to return. Then a wild boar appeared, and Sepp shot the wild boar, but it was so steep that he rolled down the mountain, and we couldn't find the wild boar. So he told me, "Go down and get my men to come up and help me find the boar and bring it back." So I ran down the mountain. I landed in the middle of a monkey herd, and they were just as scared as I was. And I kept running, and finally came back to the place. And so I said, "Boom, boom, boom, boom." I tried, since I couldn't explain it, I said, "Sepp, boom, 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 boom." And then I crawled on the floor and acted like a pig. And while Chic killed herself laughing, the guys sort of scratched their heads, and suddenly one got the idea, and off they went and to get the boar, and a few hours later brought it back, and the whole village sat around in the evening, and there was a big fire, and everybody cut off big chunks of meat, and we ate and drank, and yes. It was a delightful evening. Yes, and so we spent a few more days there hiking around, and then Sepp, he had made cheeses that were big and round, like Edam cheese, and they were carrying them back to Kathmandu to sell them there, and so we all took off and walked together to Kathmandu. Yeah, and we spent a few more days there because it's just an incredible place. It's such a beautiful place. And you know, I saw it when there was no car. When I came back the next time, there were 1,000 cars. And when I came back the third time, there were 1,000,000 cars. You know, it just changed so much. And then, yeah, and then we went back to the border. We had spent about 3 or 4 weeks, and the guys, the Indian border guys, they were so surprised to see us. They had given us up for lost, and we had to sit down and have tea with them and tell them all our adventures, and yeah, and then.
Then you're on your way for the next part.
Yes.
Renate has actually written a really nice book for her children and grandchildren.
Yes, please do talk a little bit.
I'll talk a little bit, just to. Anyways, I've read it quite closely. I just wanted to quote this one. When they came back to India, she said, "We were once more in India among the dirt and dust, the poverty and the crowds, and the many wild-looking people. But while all this had astonished and bothered us in the beginning, it did not anymore. We felt part of the scene." Just beautiful. So anyways, you're back in India.
Oh, yes.
You're heading
Well,
west for Bombay.
We actually no.
No.
Well, once we were back in India, we're heading southeast.
Okay.
Southeast first towards Delhi, but actually when we were still in the almost unoccupied area, we came to a house, and the guy was so happy to see us, and he had a sugar farm of some kind, and he didn't have a car, but he had an elephant. So he took us on a ride on the elephant, and we spent the night there, and then the next day we went on, and eventually we came to Delhi, and we came to Agra, where we saw the Taj Mahal, another wonder of the world. It's so incredibly beautiful. And then, oh yeah, and in Delhi we spent Christmas. There, we had the address of somebody, but they had to go away. But they had a house right by the ocean, and they said, "Nobody's living in there. Why don't you go in there?" So we spent a week of holiday from traveling, and in this little house, and it was so lovely. We swam and we cooked our meals, and we just loved it. Anyway, and then we finally went on to Bombay, and in Bombay we looked again for ships that would take us towards home. And we actually our scooters broke down all the time, and we spent hours trying to fix them. And we didn't think we could make it over land via Pakistan and Afghanistan and those countries. And so we tried to find a ship, but we couldn't find one for the longest time, and had just decided we do the land route after all when we found a German ship that said they would take us for $100 all the way as far as we wanted to go. They were going to Hamburg, but they weren't leaving for another 4 weeks. So we went and explored southern India. We went to Hyderabad and almost all the way to the most southern tip. And again, we met very many people, but it was very, very, very hot, and the roads, of course, were dusty, and but whenever we settled down when we put up the tent, people always came from everywhere and stood around us and watched us. But one night, we didn't feel like putting up the tent. It was so hot, and we just put down the sleeping bags and the air mattress. And suddenly, in the middle of the night, I woke up. It was pitch dark, but I knew there was something next to me that shouldn't be there. And so I waited for a long time. And then I just grabbed, and it must have been a guy. He jumped up and ran, and I jumped out of my sleeping bag and ran after him. And of course I couldn't catch him. And when I came back, Sigrid said, "Did you catch him?" And I wondered what I would have done if I had. But so we continued sleeping, and everything was fine. Yeah. Well, we had a lot of adventures. Oh my God, I'm talking too much.
It's okay. No.
We had a lot of adventures. Anyway, and then we went on this German ship, and this boiler is absolutely rotten. They just, we had the most wonderful food, and we had newspapers, and we had everything, and they wanted us in the worst way to come with them to Hamburg, but we said, no, we want to go to Egypt. We want to see a little more of the country. So in Port Suez, we got off the ship, and the cook again handed us a big bag of food, just so that you have something to eat, they said, in Egypt. And then we started scootering, and in every 5 minutes, a policeman stopped us and wanted to see all our papers. And anyway, that was in the beginning. Later, it wasn't quite as bad anymore. And we managed quite nicely and saw the most wonderful places. Luxor. We went as far as Luxor and saw the colonnade there. There was thousands of columns, all wonderfully decorated. And it was like heaven walking in there. And yeah, and then we wanted to go to Israel, but since Egypt and Israel were enemies at that time, they wouldn't give us a visa. So we took a small ship and went to Syria, and we put up our tent on the deck, and slept there, and it was really quite nice. It took about 2 or 3 days before we got there, and then from Syria we traveled through Turkey, and finally, almost before we reached Istanbul, my scooter broke. Well, there was one part that was very important that broke. I forget the name again. And so we sent a telegram to Fuji Industry in Japan and asked them to send us the part as fast as possible. And they promised that they would. And to pass the time, we left Sigrid's scooter with some people in Istanbul, and we traveled through Greece. We spent 3 weeks in Greece and enjoying. Greece is a wonderful country.
Yeah, if you're wondering how they got to Greece, they went down to Izmir and then over to Chios, the island, and then over to...
Yes,
yeah.
Just like the refugees do now. We
Yes.
took a small boat, and when we came back to Istanbul after about 3 weeks, my part had arrived, and yeah.
And you got the motor scooter fixed?
Yes, and we fixed the motor scooter, and then started traveling through Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and Austria, and eventually got home.
Wow. What a fabulous
Thank
trip.
you. You're very kind.
People nowadays, young people think that they invented extreme. but it's been around for a long time. And there's lots of women who, even in days gone by, who are having fabulous adventures. So, very well done, Renate. And then you came back to Germany.
And I came back to Germany, and shortly thereafter, Hans was there and said, "You have to come with me to Yoho and cook for me again." So, off we went to Canada again, and I cooked for Hans and skied and so on and so forth. And then I discovered Twin Falls, and I asked Mr. Brewster, "Can I rent it?" And he said, "Yeah, it costs you $40 for the year." And I mean, how cheap can it be? And so I used Twin Falls. People could come in, and it had 3 bedrooms upstairs, and they slept there, and I cooked for them, even though I had to walk down and get food and field and so on. But I really, really liked it. And then I went back home, and the next year, since I liked, and I worked really hard there, and then I went back to Twin Falls the next year, and there a man by the name of Felix came up, and we mountain climbed together, and we went all over the place, and one day he said, "Would you come with me to Mount Assiniboine?" And I said, "I'd love to." So we climbed Mount Assiniboine, and on top of it, he asked me if I would marry him. And I was afraid he would push me down if I said no. So I said yes. And we had 55 good years together.
Wow, that's fabulous. And you and Felix had
and then we went on our honeymoon in a Volkswagen Bug. Felix had made it so that the front seats, when they were put down, they met the back seats, and it was just like a double bed. And yes, and we spent 6 months or even 7 months traveling all the way to Panama. And then the road ended, and we flew to Peru and went to Machu Picchu and Cusco and saw all those wonderful places. And then oh yes, and I got pregnant even. And yes, and then we came home, and we first settled down in Calgary, where my Felix was born, my son, and he sits here in the front row. And something is wiggling here. Yeah, and and then shortly thereafter, 2 daughters arrived, and I was quite busy with the children and the household, and my husband was a mountaineer, so we had to climb lots of mountains in between, and with the kids on our backs, and so on and so forth. But we had a good time.
And then when your children were old enough that you could leave them,
yes,
with
and I
Felix.
We taught them how to ski, and we skied and climbed, and what?
And then you started going traveling again.
Yes, and once I was finished with the baby business, I went traveling again. Yes.
I've got a list of the places, just some of the places she's been since then. Hunza in Pakistan, Ladakh and Zanskar, Nepal, Tibet, China, Mexico, Guatemala, Galapagos and Ecuador, Scandinavia, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Sikkim, Turkey, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Nepal several times, Australia, Russia, Chile, Easter Islands, Syria, Jordan, New Zealand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Egypt, Mongolia, Bhutan, the Amazon River, and all over Europe. Yeah.
That's it.
That's pretty amazing, and yeah, well done, Renate.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening to me. I'm sure I bored you.
Do we have time for a couple of questions? Should we do a couple of questions?
Where haven't you been?
Renate said she's been to about 100 countries.
I have never been to Cuba. This is on my list now.
Wow. Okay, well.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being so kind and listening to me. I really appreciate it. I was terribly nervous, but now I'm glad it's over. And
Now you can go have a glass of wine.